James Red Collier wasn't he just another drifter passing through Arkansas? He was the man who turned Benton's quiet streets into a hunting ground, leaving families shattered and police desperate to stop the mysterious killer the town came to fear as the Arkansas Phantom. Benton, Arkansas, was the kind of town people described as ordinary, a place where little ever changed and life moved at a steady, predictable pace. Families had lived there for generations, bound by tradition and community trust. The air was filled with the sound of church bells on Sundays and the hum of lawnmowers on warm afternoons. It was a town where children rode their bicycles through the streets, waving to neighbors who always waved back. Nothing about Benton seemed remarkable, and that was exactly how the people liked it. But beneath the calm, something was about to unfold that would leave the town marked forever. It started with one murder. At first, it was dismissed as a tragic, isolated act of violence, the kind of crime that could happen anywhere, but felt almost impossible. In Benton, a man was found dead in his home on the edge of the woods, his life cut short in a brutal attack. Police searched for clues but found almost nothing. The house was locked. There were no signs of forced entry, and neighbors had seen no one suspicious in the area. The case disturbed investigators, but it did not yet terrify the town. People told themselves it was an unfortunate event, not the beginning of something larger. A week later, that illusion collapsed. A family of 3 was discovered murdered in their home, only a few streets away from the first victim. This time, the violence was even worse, and the sense of safety that had always defined Benton vanished overnight. Suddenly, streets that had once been filled with life fell silent. Children were no longer allowed to play outside after dark. Doors that had always been left unlocked were now bolted shut. Whispers spread from house to house as fear gripped the community. The police realized quickly that they were not dealing with random killings, but with a pattern. The victims had no known enemies, no connections that made sense. Yet they were being hunted by someone who seemed to know their routines, their homes, and the best moments to strike. That knowledge shook residents to the core. Whoever the killer was, he seemed invisible. Each night, people lay awake listening to the creaks of their houses, wondering if the next knock at the door would be their last. What had once been an ordinary town was now the hunting ground of a predator, and Benton would never be the same again. Detectives began piecing together details from each crime scene, hoping to find a thread that tied the murders together. At first glance, the killings looked random, with victims ranging from a retired teacher to a young couple and even a small child. But soon a disturbing pattern revealed itself. Every house that had been targeted sat close to the edge of the woods that curved around Benton like a dark shadow. The killer was using the cover of trees to slip in and out unnoticed, leaving almost nothing behind but fear. It was as if he was studying his victims, choosing those who lived closest to the forest line, striking when the night was deepest and quietest. Investigators also noticed that small items had been taken from each home. These were not valuables like jewelry or electronics, but deeply personal objects. A wristwatch from the teacher's bedside table, a photograph from the young couple's living room, a child's toy missing from the last house. These strange thefts hinted that the murderer was not killing for money or survival. He was collecting pieces of his victims, trophies that allowed him to relive the terror he created. That detail changed the entire nature of the investigation. The killer was not only dangerous but obsessive, and likely proud of what he was doing. As the death toll rose, the town gave him a name. People whispered it at gas stations, in church pews, and on front porches. The Arkansas Phantom. He seemed to appear and vanish like smoke, leaving behind only bodies and questions. Police doubled their patrols, setting up roadblocks at night and sending helicopters to circle the skies above the woods. Despite the overwhelming presence of law enforcement, the Phantom struck again. His ability to move undetected suggested he knew the area better than anyone, almost as if the forest belonged to him. Then came a shocking discovery that pushed the case forward. Near the home of the latest victims, officers found tire tracks leading into a rarely used dirt path deep in the trees. Following it, they uncovered an abandoned pickup truck, its paint faded and its windows cracked. Inside, detectives found something chilling: old newspapers detailing the murders, marked with circles around the headlines, as though the killer had been tracking his own infamy. The truck had no license plate, and its registration had been scraped away, but the evidence was clear. The Phantom was not just hiding in the woods, he was living there, planning his next move while the town of Benton held its breath. The discovery of the abandoned pickup truck triggered the largest manhunt the county had ever witnessed. Officers from surrounding towns joined the search, and federal agents soon offered their expertise. Benton, once known for its sleepy charm, now resembled a war zone. Roadblocks appeared at every exit, police cars patrolled the empty streets, and helicopters swept beams of light over the thick woods night after night. Residents were urged to stay indoors, and volunteers combed the forest with flashlights, hoping to find something the killer had left behind. Yet for all the manpower, the Arkansas Phantom managed to stay hidden, almost as if he were watching from the shadows and enjoying the chaos he caused. For several days, there were no new murders. Some people hoped that the killer had fled, scared by the sheer force of the search. But detectives knew better. They suspected he was still close, lying low and waiting for the attention to fade. Their instincts proved right when a local hunter stumbled upon an unsettling scene deep in the woods. He had been tracking deer when he came across an old mining shaft, long abandoned and barely visible beneath tangled brush. From inside came the faint smell of smoke and the sound of rustling. Alarmed, he alerted authorities. When police descended on the site, they uncovered what could only be described as a hidden campsite. There were lanterns, half-eaten food, and sleeping bags scattered across the cold ground. Even more disturbing were the items taken from victims' homes: photographs, trinkets, and personal belongings that had no value to anyone except the killer. It was clear the Phantom had been living only miles from town, using the old mines as shelter and moving silently through the woods to strike. The discovery electrified the community, but also heightened the fear. Knowing the murderer was so close to home left residents more unsettled than ever. Despite the breakthrough, the Phantom once again slipped away before authorities could trap him. Bloodhounds caught his scent, but the trail ended at a riverbank where it seemed he had vanished. Each time the police closed in, he escaped, leaving behind nothing but eerie signs of his presence. It was becoming clear that the killer knew the terrain far better than his pursuers. The people of Benton felt trapped, as if the forest itself was protecting him, and every night ended with the same unanswered question: where would the Phantom strike next? Weeks passed with no rest, and the weight of fear pressed heavier on Benton. The killer's silence made him seem even more dangerous. Police continued their patrols, and investigators pored over evidence, desperate for a mistake that could reveal his identity. That mistake finally came, not through careful planning, but by accident. At dawn one morning, a patrol officer noticed a thin column of smoke rising above the treetops in a remote stretch of forest. The officer followed the trail cautiously and soon stumbled upon another hidden campsite, smaller than the one found before, but just as disturbing. Inside the camp were empty cans, torn blankets, and a pile of stolen objects: photographs, watches, and personal belongings that tied directly to the earlier murders. Among the trash was something investigators had been praying for: a discarded tin can with clear fingerprints pressed into its surface. The prints were rushed to the state crime lab, and within hours, a name surfaced: James "Red" Collier. He was a drifter with a long history of violence, known for working odd jobs and moving from town to town without warning. Years earlier, he had been employed in the Benton mines, giving him intimate knowledge of the tunnels and woods that surrounded the community. The revelation stunned authorities and horrified residents. Collier had lived among them, seen in bars and gas stations, never suspected of harboring such darkness. His record showed assaults, thefts, and a history of mental instability, but nothing that hinted at mass murder. The truth, however, was clear. Collier had grown bolder with each killing, and now that his name was exposed, he was more dangerous than ever. Police released his image to the public, urging everyone to remain indoors and report any sighting immediately. Despite the breakthrough, Collier continued to elude capture. His knowledge of the terrain gave him an advantage that frustrated every effort to pin him down. He moved only at night, using the thick cover of trees and the abandoned mines to disappear whenever police drew near. Each failed attempt to trap him eroded confidence in law enforcement and deepened the town's sense of dread. Benton was no longer waiting for another attack, it was bracing for one. For every locked door and shuttered window, there was the haunting thought that James Collier was out there in the woods, watching, planning, and waiting for the right moment to strike again. The manhunt stretched into its second month, and Benton's fear hardened into exhaustion. Families were living behind locked doors, businesses closed early, and the once bustling town had grown eerily quiet. Despite the overwhelming police presence, James Collier seemed untouchable, slipping in and out of the woods like a shadow. Yet the killer's confidence soon betrayed him. In early October, a farmer on the outskirts of town reported strange noises near his barn late at night. When police responded, they discovered pry marks on the door and fresh footprints in the dirt. For the first time, Collier had made a critical mistake. He had tried to break into a house under surveillance. The response was immediate. Officers swarmed the area, setting up roadblocks and deploying search dogs. When Collier realized he had been spotted, he fled into the dense woods that had served as his sanctuary. The chase stretched deep into the night, with helicopters casting beams of light across the treetops and the sound of barking dogs echoing through the hills. Collier knew the land better than anyone, but this time he was outnumbered and cornered. Every path he took seemed blocked, every hiding place already discovered. The pursuit ended in the abandoned mine shafts he once knew so well. Collier sprinted into the tunnels, hoping the darkness would shield him as it had before. But police had anticipated his move. Floodlights lit the entrances, and heavily armed officers closed in from multiple sides. Trapped underground with no escape, Collier fought desperately to avoid capture, but the odds were impossible. Within minutes, he was subdued and dragged out into the night, his reign of terror finally over. News of his arrest spread quickly, and relief washed over the town like a long-awaited storm breaking. Residents who had lived in fear for weeks gathered in small groups, whispering prayers of gratitude and shaking their heads in disbelief that the nightmare was finally finished. Benton would never be the same. The memory of those weeks, the empty streets, the sleepless nights, and the constant dread had carved scars into the town's history. Yet there was also a sense of triumph, that the phantom, once thought unstoppable, had been brought down by persistence and determination. James "Red" Collier became a name that echoed far beyond Arkansas, a grim reminder of how easily peace could be shattered and how hard communities must fight to reclaim it.